Yeah, there's two of them. There's one for last year and then this year. Because they're gonna flip over.
Who's he talking to? Well, call the meeting to order and he can just come in when he gets notice. Call the meeting to order.
I can't. If I do that, we're going to mess up on stuff here.
Here he comes.
Okay. All right. Sorry for the delay, folks. Please join me in the pledge, please. I pledge
Pledge
allegiance
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America
and to the republic
for which it stands,
one nation, under God, indivisible,
with liberty and justice for all.
You have the youth and governance names there? Huh? No. Roll call, please. State your name and address for the record, please. Citizen comments. Citizen comments. All right, citizen comments are closed. Announcements to the chairman. You had a few items placed on your desk this evening. The county board calendar has been placed on your desk. Budget hearing, adoption, and all that material is on there. Those dates are pretty firm right now. We have the WCA coming up, and the county clerk would like to know whether or not you'll be attending by the end of this business week. By the end of this business week, let her know. And also on your desk, you have contact information, and if that information is correct and current, please mark OK and hand it back up to the clerk after the meeting, please. We'll move on to
Youth and governance is here. Where'd you put it?
where is it?
And then you covered it up.
Oh, I'd like to also welcome our two youth in governance, Mr. Frost and Mr. Wilker, to my right and your left. Welcome tonight, gentlemen. And we'll move on to supervisor reports. Supervisor reports. Okay. Supervisor Boyd Frederick, you have the floor.
Thank you. On Wednesday, the 7th of April, I myself, the clerk of courts, and the county clerk went up to Madison to speak to our legislators about some items that was through the Wisconsin Counties Association. One of the first ones we talked to about was countywide assessing. Since the time that we were up there, this has been taken out of the budget. It was one of the first 14 items taken out last week. Other issues included income maintenance, family care, mental health proposal, community option program, and aging disability resource centers. The aging and disability resource centers will be up in front of the Joint Finance Committee tomorrow afternoon. So we'll be able to find out if we'll be able to keep the centers here, at least this part of the budget.
Thank you, Supervisor Frederick. Seeing no other lights, I want to add also that Supervisor Hallman and Supervisor Skolitsky are excused for this evening's. Go on to new business, County Clerk.
Resolution 118 from Judiciary and Law Committee, a probationary cabaret license for the town square. Esposito, yes. Anita Johnson, yes. Boyd Frederick, yes. Arrington, yes. Ron Johnson, yes. Leah Blau, yes. Poole, yes.
Supervisor Esposito.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move Resolution 118.
Resolution 118 has been moved by Supervisor Esposito, seconded by Supervisor Anita Johnson. Supervisor Esposito.
Thank you. This is a probationary cabaret license for Town Square. tavern that, in the town of Salem that didn't have any violations. The issue they had some construction issues and a roof that had to been taken care of, and all that has been taken care of to the standards of the town, so we recommended approval, and I ask for your approval. Thank you.
Thank you. Vice Chair Bruning?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I did speak with the town of Salem over the weekend, and they assured me that they have had no additional comments or complaints from the residents of the town of Salem. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Chair Bruning. So simple majority vote. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed? Passes unanimously. County Clerk?
Resolution 119 from Finance Administration Committee regarding 2014 to 2015 carryover and annual closeout. Rose, yes. Ron Frederick excused. Colmeyer, yes. O'Day, yes. Brunig, yes. Dodge, yes. Gens, yes.
Supervisor Rose?
Mr. Chairman and Board, I would move the carryover resolution.
Resolution 119 has been moved by Supervisor Rose, seconded by Supervisor John O'Day. Supervisor Rose.
All right, this is a standard type of resolution that comes before the board annually. There are certain items which were appropriated in the prior year's budget, and for various reasons, those things were not fulfilled, but the intent is to continue them into the 2015 budget and complete the project or make the purchase. Those items are listed on the attachment, and we would ask for your approval of that this evening.
Thank you, Supervisor Rose. Seeing no lights, this requires 2/3 vote. Roll call has been asked for. Yes if you're in favor, or no if you're against.
One 120 from Finance Administration Committee to approve the recommendation of the classification and compensation study. Rose, yes. Ron Frederick excused. O'Day, yes. Brunig, yes. Colmeyer, yes. Dodge, yes. Gens, yes.
Supervisor Rose.
Mr. Chairman and Board, I would move the resolution.
Resolution 120 has been moved by Supervisor Rose, seconded by Vice Chair Bruning. Supervisor Rose.
The proposition is in front of you, and this has some very substantial changes. It is based upon the study made by Siegel Waters, and there is a representative here this evening who has presented the recommendations to the Finance Committee, and I would ask that the board listen to that report before I make a further statement.
Sure.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Supervisor Rose. Members of the County Board, I'd like to introduce to you Heather Kazemi. Heather is the Vice President from Siegel Waters Consulting. About a year ago, you gave us the authority and the money necessary to do a review of our exempt employees or our management team and several groups of our non-exempt employees, including highway and clericals. And we have worked the better part of the last year to put together a recommendation on wages and changes in the wage ranges for the employees who are in those categories. I think we all know that it is becoming a competitive market for employees. We want to make sure that we can attract good employees to our jobs in all categories. And so Ms. Kazemi and her company has embarked on this process. To explain it to you just a little bit further, it is an objective analysis of what people with similar talents and with similar responsibilities do in our market and what they earn. It is a total compensation proposal. So it includes not just wages, but it includes all of our benefits, including pension, health insurance, and some other things. With that, I'll turn it over to Ms. Kazemian. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to share with you briefly what I shared with the Finance Committee last week. That is to talk about the study goals and objectives. That is what you asked us to do. The methodology and approach that we took with it to collect and analyze the data. Spend a few minutes on the study findings, and then talk a bit about the recommendations. As you know, you asked us to do a total compensation market assessment. What that means is we looked at the base pay rates and pay ranges for the clerical, highway, and unclassified jobs. It covers about 380 county employees. And we looked at salaries, pay practices, paid leave, health benefits, and retirement benefits. And I understand this hasn't been done at the county in about 15 years. So what we did is we looked at both public sector and private sector and compared the county's current pay and benefits to 18 public sector entities in the general region, mostly in Wisconsin, and 2 in northern Illinois. And we used some published data sources for the private sector data. We looked at 87 benchmark job titles, again covering those 3 groups, clerical, highway, and unclassified, and they represent about 78% of all of the 380 employees in those categories. We did some data adjustments to the information that we collected, and this is standard practice. We did some geographic adjustments, comparing or adjusting the data based on costs in those different areas. As you know, it's the cost of living is much higher in northern Illinois, and it's lower in some other areas in Wisconsin. So to make that apples to apples comparison, we did those adjustments. Also, for the similar reasons, we had to adjust some pay rates that were based on a 37.5-hour work week compared to Kenosha's 40-hour work week. So overall, looking at just base pay, starting with the first element of total compensation, we found that the county's pay rates are less competitive with the private sector than with other public sector employers. Overall, the county's current pay ranges, that is the minimum to the maximum, the starting rate to the top rate, are about 10% below the market average at that starting salary and about 5 to 6% below the market average at the midpoint and the maximum of the pay range. Now that covers all of the jobs covered in the study on average. And you see here the numbers in red show that we consider the pay rates to be below market, that is less than 95% of the market average. So in the private sector, about 10 to 15% below private sector average and closer to the public sector average. This slide here shows the same information in a graphical form, showing where you are compared to that competitive range, those dotted lines across the middle of the page. This chart shows the aggregate result over the 3 job groups, that is clerical, highway, and unclassified. What we found in this study is that on looking at the base pay, the unclassified job pay ranges were further behind market than clerical and highway. So looking at the other elements of total compensation, starting with paid leave, we found that the county's paid time off program, which combines vacation, sick leave, and personal days into one pool of time off per year, we found that that program provides fewer days off, fewer paid days off per year than the public sector average, and also lower than the private sector average. So in general, we found about 7 to 8 days fewer paid leave days for Kenosha County employees compared with your public sector peers. This shows that same information in graphical form. Looking at health benefits, we found that the county's cost-sharing arrangements for health and dental benefits for employees is comparable to the public sector average. It's very similar to what we see around the country and similar to what we saw in the survey covering the county covers about 90% of employees' costs for health and dental benefits. That 90% is a bit higher than what you typically see in the private sector. On average, we found the typical private sector employer pays about 70% of medical benefits, similar to the counties here, which is a PPO plan. So we're just comparing to PPO plans in this case. As far as retirement benefits, we found that the county's costs are very similar to your public sector peers, and that's because most of the peers that we looked at in this market study also participate in the Wisconsin retirement system, so have the same costs that you have. On the private sector side, the story is a little more complicated. Private employers are less likely to offer a defined benefit plan or a typical pension plan that you would see in the public sector. But those that do, we found, have a higher contribution rate or higher cost than in the public sector. So it's kind of an interesting difference there. Of course, the defined contribution plans, like a 401k plan, much more typical in the private sector. And we found typical employer contribution for these 401k plans is usually a match to what employees put into the plan, usually around 4 to 5%. And that compares to the Wisconsin retirement system current required contribution of 7%. So when we roll everything together and look at total compensation, that is adding pay and the cost of benefits, as well as in the private sector, there are bonuses or variable pay that you typically do not see in the public sector. So if we add all of these pieces together, we found that Kenosha County's market position improves a little bit compared to your public sector peers. And that's because the straight cost, the monthly cost of your health benefits is slightly higher than we saw in some of the other counties and cities we surveyed. But an interesting finding on the private sector side, your market position stayed exactly the same. And that's because the county's higher benefit costs are offset by the bonuses and variable pay that you see in the private sector. So we saw the same total compensation, it just in different elements of it. So when we added it up, we found the county on a total compensation basis is still about 10% behind the private sector on average. And here's that information in graphical form. You can see the stacked bars with each piece of total compensation. And what we found is on average, total compensation in the private sector is about $10,000 per year above the public sector for these same jobs. And again, on average, across all 87 jobs. So once we had all this information together and we talked about what to do with it, we're recommending new pay scales for the county. One pay scale for non-exempt, that is hourly employees, and another pay scale for exempt employees. Currently, you have separate pay scales across these three employee groups. We're consolidating those and recommending consistent pay structure for all of the jobs in this study. And Bob's going to tell you a little more about the recommendations.
In addition to the changes in the wage proposals, we are also recommending a couple of changes in the policies and procedures that manage the pay plan. And so we are proposing that employees going forward will receive one raise per year if they have a positive or an above average evaluation. All employees will be evaluated on an annual basis. If they have an above average annual evaluation, they will get 3% of the midpoint of the wage range in which they work. The second change that we are proposing is a consolidation and slight expansion of two stipends that you gave us last year in the policies and procedures. Special assignment pay, which you know is extra pay for employees who take on additional responsibilities, extraordinary additional responsibilities to their normal duties. And then the retention bonus, which we have used to encourage people to continue working for county government even though they're contemplating retirement. A tool that is used frequently in the private sector and we think would be valuable for us is to expand the retention to allow for some consideration at the discretion of the county to employees who are contemplating leaving county employ. An excellent employee who is contemplating a new job at one of our other employers might be enticed to say, if we could be nimble enough to give them a quick retention financial consideration in order to get them to stay. And again, Ms. Gazemi has researched this for us, finds it very common in the private sector and a very useful tool. And so we are seeking that in the policies and procedures as we go forward. I think that's all I have to share, but hopefully you have all looked at this. After the Finance Committee meeting on Thursday evening, the committee requested that we put together a comparison, kind of line by line. In the middle of this document, you will find the new job titles and what we are proposing for their wages and what those job titles currently earn. This does have a financial impact, as you all know, and so I've asked Dave Gertson to speak briefly on just exactly what this means financially to the county.
Am I good to go? Looks like I'm good to go. I'm green here. Okay.
You're all
good.
green.
So I'll speak to the fiscal impact of the plan that was just presented, and I'll talk about the fiscal analysis that was sent to you in your board packet. We used 2014 as a base year. We stripped away costs that wouldn't be impacted by the analysis, primarily health insurance, but a few other small pieces. So we started with a roughly 61.8 million base that we worked from in the 2014 budget in our analysis. The analysis that you see should be familiar to you because the way it functions is similar to the costing my department did for collective bargaining when we would bring contracts in. So hopefully you have some familiarity and some comfort with the approach we used in the analysis. In 2015, you can see the total increase in the budget was just under $2 million. In this 61.8 million pot went up to 63.7 million. That included everything. For example, it included new staffing, reductions in staffing, and some other pieces. So not all of that was for wage increases, but that's the total increase on the base that we were analyzing from. And then in the analysis that we sent, you can see with the cost impact of the plan that was presented that affects about 400 of our employees, the total impact is about 1.7 million. So if you're wondering, is there enough money in the budget to implement this plan? Yes, there is enough money to implement the plan. In fact, there's 235,000 surplus. So we anticipated the plan successfully in the budget, and there's a little bit of a surplus. Then we went out a year further, looked at 2016, and we looked at all costs for all employees. Again, this plan looks at all costs for all county employees, and taken into consideration any known increase, including the one contract we still have with the deputies, and then estimating that employees that are not part of the plan would get the same increase in 16 that they got in 15. It shows about a $500,000 impact, or about just under 0.8% impact on the budget. So you can see that the plan that's before you is very modest from a fiscal standpoint and very sustainable. There was another analysis that was sent to you, and that analysis looks at just the impact of the plan. So the first analysis looks at the impact of the plan and all other employees not in the plan. The second analysis looks at just the impact of the plan. And you can see that of the roughly $2 million that was in the budget, 1.3 million was anticipated for the plan, and only 1.1 million was needed. So that's where the 235,000 surplus comes from. And then in 2016, you can look at the impact for 2016, about a $336,000 impact. So of the $500,000, about $336,000 is driven by the plan. So again, very modest fiscal impact if the board favors this plan and adopts this plan tonight. So And that concludes my comments. I think at this point, we'll turn it back to the chair. Is that okay?
Very good, thank you.
Mr. Chairman, may I continue?
Supervisor Rose, you have the floor.
All right. Thank you. The committee reviewed this and requests your support, but I would urge the board to consider this amendment, which I discussed with Mr. Riedel and the county executive just briefly before this meeting, and they did not, the county executive did not oppose what I am going to propose. And that's based upon this letter that was signed by all of the judges here and received and placed on your desk today. The letter was drafted today, April 21st, and it brought to our attention, and what was not brought to our attention at the committee, specifically that the current judicial clerks, which are called legal secretaries, under the proposed plan would be demoted to deputy courtroom clerk. In other words, going from what they would be currently a NE6 to a 5 category. If you haven't read the letter from the judges, I would urge you to take a moment to do so. I would ask, Mr. Chairman, to amend the proposition before you to continue the legal secretary title, which are judicial clerks, in the NE6 category, and not demote them to the category of deputy courtroom clerk as proposed. This, I think, is more consistent with the letters which has been signed here. I think the letter actually proposes that they go to the category NE7, as it is indicated, their responsibilities are comparable to some of those people who are listed in NE7. But for this evening's sake, at least, I would ask, and we certainly could study that issue in the future, I would ask that they be continued in the legal secretary category, which they are now, and that they be classified NE6 instead of 5, and I would so move.
So you want to move them from 5 to 6? That's your motion on that particular portion of this
Correct.
item that we're discussing tonight. Is there a second on that? Seconded by Supervisor Boyd Frederick. Now we're going to have discussion on that. We'll go on to Ron Frederick. You have the floor, sir.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I guess if we're going to pick and choose as to, I mean, I talked to some of the employees that weren't happy with this. So, you know, there's a letter from the judges, so right away we're going to take care of the judges, okay, because, you know, we want, and maybe they're right. But I would be more in favor of putting, and I understand the city did this, putting an appeals process for employees to come in and talk to us, because I've talked to some employees who aren't happy. So we're just going to pick out clerks from the clerk of court's office, and we're going to give them whatever it is we're going to give them. Are we going to give them a bump with that changing? Is that what he's proposing? Is that going to cost more dollars?
Can you answer that?
Yes, I can answer that. What I'm proposing is that the category of legal secretary, which is their current job title, remain legal secretary and remain in the NE6 classification. Now, if you look at your chart, the top maximum for a legal secretary is $23.79. The proposed top is $26.32. Everybody here in these various classifications moves up. So to specifically answer your question, yes, it would move their pay scale up based upon the classification or job title of legal secretary.
And here's the problem I have with that. There are a lot of other employees who are unhappy with this report because some of them don't get anything at all. And in fact, some of them are below and aren't going to get a raise for a couple of years from what I can read it. I thought I couldn't make the finance meeting last Thursday. And the chairman knew that. And I suggested that maybe because 2 of us or 3 of us didn't get, we got 150 pages the day before on additional information. and I wanted to delay it, okay? Now, I'm not suggesting we don't vote on this tonight, but I'm suggesting that instead of what Supervisor Rose wants, that we adopt this report as it is, and then we give employees a right, because I understand the city did the same thing. They give the employees who felt that they weren't in pride categories the right to appeal. Can somebody correct me if I'm wrong on that? Because I was told that they did. But I would not be in favor of this, because then we're just picking a certain group of people because they happen to, maybe they're right. But the judge sends us a letter, and then here we are making a motion to do what the judges want. I'm not being it's wrong. I'm not, I'll get 8 judges mad at me, but I'm going to tell you what, it's not right. You can't pick things out of a report. But you can set an appeal process to do it. So I'm not going to support this. No way. Thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor Ron Frederick. Supervisor Alverman, you have the floor, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You can pick things out of a report, but you shouldn't pick them, or you can't expect us to pick them out of a report. A well-respected group of people like these judges, who I know, respect, and enjoy good relationships with all of them, to send us a letter today, I'm not accepting that. I did ask Mr. Riedel, because I saw this on my desk. I went down and had a short conversation. The people involved in this are getting $1.09 an hour increase over what they would be in their old classification. So I think Supervisor Frederick's idea of setting up some type of process but passing this evening would certainly be not only an advantage, pay advantage to the people that are asking for this, but a fairness to all the county employees. And we cannot, and I'm surprised that we're even considering this tonight, we cannot, when we have 1,000 employees, and I'm sure we have more than that now, start doing something like this. We wanted this study badly. We knew, and I knew in the responsibilities that I have as a county board supervisor, that we have to remain competitive, and we were becoming non-competitive. This is horribly important that we pass this, that we reclassify, start the new process, but doing this for, how many employees? It's maybe 15 employees. It's not the time this evening, and possibly I would agree to an amendment that would set in an immediate appeals process. I believe that may keep our personnel department and everyone horribly busy if we do that, though. I think this study was well documented. Everyone had a chance to speak on this. Everyone knew we were doing this. I was told last Thursday at the Finance Committee, not one person spoke. Not one. I don't think that's wrong, including opposition from supervisors. So I would urge everyone to not go astray on this evening. If you want to go astray, let's dump the whole thing for a month here, but sit here and nitpick on it this evening for 15 out of 1,100 employees is not the proper way to handle this report. Thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor Alverman. Supervisor Dodge, you have the floor.
Yes, I just want to inform you that I got a call from Corporation Counsel on Monday informing me that I will not be able to vote. I'll have to abstain on voting on any issues because I have a family member that works for the county. Thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor Dodge. Supervisor Noble, you have the floor.
Well, I would rather speak on the entire, if you want me to just speak on the amendment, then I will pass.
Yeah, let's work on the amendment for now, and then we'll work on the other.
I would say the only thing about the amendment that concerns me is the fact that the chairman of the committee said it's something that they weren't aware of, wasn't brought to their attention at the committee, and What concerns me is what else aren't they aware of and what else may not have been brought to their attention. But that's all I'll say about the amendment.
Thank you, Supervisor Noble. Anybody else wishing to speak on
Mr. Chairman?
Supervisor Rose?
I think Supervisor Elberman was correct. There was no one in the audience who spoke during citizen comments. There were a number of people there, but regardless, I don't know that that's a reason to defeat the amendment. Granted, the judge's letter comes late, and they admit that in the letter, and it would have been better had it been brought to the committee's attention before. But the issue is quite simple, though, really. One could say, well, we'll set up an appeals process on this, and they can come in and argue the case. And the case is pretty much argued right here in this letter. And I say, take the time to read it rather quickly. You'll see the issue. It wasn't brought to their attention, and I think the judges make that very clear here, where it says, and I quote, "None of the judges were ever consulted on the survey, other than merely signing off on the forms completed by our clerks. We're very concerned that the lack of input directly from the judges has negatively affected the results of the survey." So, you know, the issue is still there, and we're not talking about a great deal of money, but I think we are talking about responsibilities that these judicial clerks have, which is certainly as substantial as the NE7 responsibilities that are listed in that pay classification. I don't want to see the proposal defeated this evening either, but I think that, or adjourned or to another date for consideration by this board. But the argument here is made in this letter of April 21st, which is signed unanimously by the judges. We're not talking about a great deal of money, and we're not talking about other categories as well. And if there are other people who are unhappy for whatever reason they may be unhappy, they didn't speak up at the Finance Committee at all, and I have not received any input from them. That is not to say that that would not be considered if they make some proposal through one of you as supervisors or come before the committee and discuss it with us. So we need not really consider in any way on a broader basis what if. What we do have before us is a proposition of demotion of legal clerks to a lower category, which I think is unwarranted. And had it been brought to the Finance Committee's attention, I think we would have corrected it. Unfortunately, it wasn't. But that doesn't mean that the proposition isn't warranted for your support this evening. Granted, the judges, and they admit they should have brought it to our attention earlier. But it's still not too late. It's still before you this evening. It's still an open proposition. You understand the issue. By suggesting that it come back to us, I don't know what we would consider other than that which we have before you. So I would ask that you vote this amendment up or down this evening, and that we live with it, and that we deal with any other issue that there might be in the future, but not speculate tonight on what those issues might be. What the proposition is here, let's keep the legal secretaries at the category that they are currently in, which is on this chart, A6. Let's not call them something they are not, which is a category 5, and support the proposition and move on with passage of the resolution.
Is that it?
Yes.
Supervisor Decker.
Obviously, there's some consternation with this amendment, and I have some issues with it because it was brought up last minute on the here on the floor of the county board floor and wasn't discussed in committee. So I'd like to make a motion to refer this resolution back to committee. I know that there was a motion in committee, or at least I heard there was a motion in the committee to table it for the next meeting, and it failed 3-3. So obviously some members think there should be more discussion in the committee. So I'd like to make a motion to refer it back to committee.
It's Been moved and seconded by Anita Johnson for the second. I gotta get a little legal ease here before we move forward. She can do that? Okay, so we have a motion on the floor to put it back to committee. Supervisor Decker made the motion. Supervisor Anita Johnson seconded that. Now, does anybody want to speak on that particular? Okay, we've got Supervisor Anita Johnson here. I'm going to clear the board right now. So we got people that were on from before. I'm going to go to Supervisor Anita Johnson. Anybody wishing to speak, hit your lights now, please. Supervisor Anita Johnson.
I think it's clear that there have been mistakes made, and we owe it to the employees to fix it. Now, I would like to see that done here tonight, but it looks like that's not going to happen, so it does need to go back to committee before it happens, or before we pass it. It needs to be addressed. Also, you know, I think that we also need to include something in there so that when others come forward, we are able to fix it for them as well. We can't penalize people because they didn't make it to a meeting to tell us about something. I mean, if it's unfair and nobody caught it, we need to fix it when it's caught.
Is that it? Yeah. Thank you, Supervisor Anita Johnson. Supervisor Gens, you have the floor.
The committee for a number of reasons. One, I don't know that I'll be able to make it back to that meeting. I did attend the meeting and get the information that we had, and having this brought to us now, whether it's correct or incorrect, I'm not comfortable with that. So I will not be voting for that. I also need, as part of my decision on whether or not to send it back, to know whether the people in the study, Mr. Riedel and the person from the firm that did the study, considered this. And I'd like to hear them. We've had a political banter back and forth the whole time and not heard from the people who actually did the study and put the time in. So before I would refer it back to committee, I'd like to hear from Mr. Riedel and Ms. Kazemi about whether or not this was thought about in the study that was prepared for us. So if, through the chair, if I could have that response, I'd appreciate it.
Would you like to come up, Ms. Kazemi, please? Thank you.
Somebody dive in.
Sorry. Got to get closer to the mic, please.
Have the gallery on that. Turn the gallery off.
It's on. It's
Hello?
on.
Is that better? I'm sorry, everyone.
It's okay.
What we asked the consultant to do was to take the job descriptions and to take the individual employee's job description questionnaire, something they filled out, and to take that information, compare it to the databases from the private sector that they had, and compare it to the responses to surveys from, I think it was 20 public sector comparables in our market, to find out whether our wages for those jobs, based on the duties that were determined by the method I said, where we ranked in terms of those comparables with our demographic area. Now, Heather can tell you what the demographic area is more clearly than I, but we define an area, a radius around Kenosha from which we draw our employees, and we were seeking to be competitive in that market. And so they used very objective data and the information that was provided by the employees and my office through the job descriptions to come up with their recommendations.
I'll add to that very briefly and say that we applied a consistent methodology for all jobs and all employees in this category. And the recommendations are based on an objective, consistent approach for all jobs. And I think perhaps the best way to think about the recommended new pay system is to think of it as the foundation of a new house. It's the beginning of a new house. And you need to let it settle a little bit. I would advise you to adopt it, let it settle, live with it. Yes, think of an appeals process, think of some other approach where if this is not the best approach for the county, if you find that that is the case in the future, where you're having difficulty recruiting, retaining, if something is found that is not perfect for the county, then you deal with it at that time. But I would think of this as the beginning of this new house, let it settle, live with it, see if it works.
Okay, again, that was a broad painting of what we're talking about here. Let me drill down. Is it true that what I heard before, that they would be getting $1.09 more under the new, I mean, that number was thrown out, is that correct?
$1.06.
I think it's $1.06.
Okay. The second thing is I want to know, the question I asked and the reason I brought you guys up was to see if their actual job title was looked at. And I know what you're saying about being competitive in a region, but we're actually discussing the job title not being classified clearly, is what I'm hearing.
We looked at all of the job titles, including this one.
Okay.
In exactly the same manner.
Okay, so it's your impression that they're being categorized in the right spot, even though they were maybe something else? I mean, is that what I'm hearing?
That is my perception.
Okay. Okay. All right, thank you.
Thank you, folks. We'll move on to Supervisor Ron Frederick.
Well, there was a motion, obviously, at the Finance Committee meeting to delay it, and it lost on a tie vote because I was unable to be there. The chairman knew I wasn't, but quite frankly, I had talked to him, and he didn't seem to object to the fact that we would delay it anyway. But I guess from that standpoint, it's here. I'm certainly not for this amendment, but I'm not too sure whether referring it back will solve anything, so if this amendment loses, I have an amendment I'd like to add to the resolution. Thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor Ron Frederick. Supervisor Kohlmeyer, you have the floor.
Yeah, I just had one other question for either the consultant or Mr. Riedel, but maybe through the chair. If this is brought back to the committee and there's questions about specific jobs, like we've received on our desk and then through the email, would you guys be able to look at those specific positions and your methodology and perhaps propose changes, or are we saying this study is done? I'm just saying if it's brought back to committee, is there a chance this is reviewed now instead of an appeal process?
I hadn't contemplated the question. Again, everything was very data-driven and very market-based and very competitive-based. And so there was an attempt to be as objective as possible so that it was as pure of a system as we could get. So I have not contemplated what we would do in a process that involved an appeal. I've seen appeal processes. The last appeal process we had here did not go well. And so it's hard to say. I really would be uncomfortable answering your question, Supervisor, until I had contemplated what was necessary.
Is that all, Supervisor Kohlmeyer?
Yeah, that's it.
Supervisor John O'Day.
Thank you, Chairman. Through the Chairman to the Corporation Council, it relates to all the issues we're talking about tonight. If we don't refer it back and the amendment gets passed, are we not creating an appeal process tonight then? Just by having the circuit court letter come to us and we're changing the resolution that we're trying to pass by appeal already?
If I understand the question that you're asking, Supervisor, it is, are you, even if not in name, in fact, creating an appeals process by allowing this board to make an adjustment to the proposed plan? Is that the question you're asking me?
Overall, yes.
I'm not sure it's a legal question, but certainly I would think that
this board has the authority to make changes to the employee classification plan. It's typically done as part of the budget, I would assume, but I would think that at any point in time, they would have the ability to make that change.
All right. I would like to just see the first resolution passed and work out the details of the other items later. Thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor O'Day. Supervisor Anita Johnson.
I just have one question through the chair. And I think that Chairman Gens may have been trying to ask this question and it wasn't really answered. We get the regional competitiveness, and that's what you were looking for in your study. But the question here is, why weren't they put in the same category as other department legal secretaries? That's the question. There's a concern about, as far as the judges, what the judges brought forward, that their legal secretaries are performing the same duties as the legal secretaries and paralegals in the executive department, sheriff's and district attorney's offices. So that's the concern, not in the region, not the competitiveness, we get that. It's why were they distinguished to be demoted amongst all the legal secretaries in the different areas?
I don't have the position description questionnaires in front of me, but I can tell you that in looking at both those questionnaires and the market in terms of what other counties call those positions, if I recall correctly, most of the counties in the area do not call them legal secretaries and are not part of the legal secretary classification, and have a court-specific job title and a court-specific job description, such as judicial assistant, courtroom clerk, these types of jobs.
See, our judges do consider them their legal secretaries. I mean, and that is evident here on this paper, that they are considered their legal secretaries and are expected to do the same duties as a legal secretary.
Well, again, this is something that is typically handled in an appeal process after a plan is in place, and employees or their supervisors would have the ability to appeal a classification title. That is typically how these are handled in other organizations that I've worked with. Not generally discussed in a county board meeting.
Absolutely.
If I may add, we did ask for titles which more accurately describe what our employees do. And you are all familiar with the title office associate, senior office associate. Mm-hmm. We find that in our recruiting practices, I'm sorry to bring it up again, but that is what drives this, is that it's better to call a court clerk, a deputy county clerk, a deputy county clerk, rather than saying an office associate who works here, or an office associate who does there. It creates some competitive inequity among the employees internally, and really makes classifying jobs and paying them appropriately easier if you specifically hone in on what these folks do on a daily basis. Sure. And so changing the titles was something we gave Ms. Kazemi's company the authority to recommend.
Is that all? Okay, thank you. Supervisor Goldwyn.
My question is, are we debating the judge's letter or the motion to send this back to committee? I'm hearing both
Right now, what
ways.
we're talking about is sending it back to committee, so if you talk about that, I'm okay with that.
I just wanted to clear up what we were doing.
Okay. I hope I did. Okay. Supervisor Rose, did you have your light on?
I do.
Okay.
I'm going to vote against deferring this, but I will tell you this, that if this is deferred, I'll call a special meeting of the Finance Committee next week to consider these various proposals and arguments, and we will present this back to the county board at the first meeting in May, not the second meeting. Traditionally, we meet during the middle of the month before the last meeting of the county board. There's no reason why we can't meet next week, and if we do delay it, I would ask Finance Committee members to stay briefly following this meeting, and we'll decide whether we'll meet at what day next week, and we can certainly handle that if that is your decision. There is no appeal process before the board this evening, so when somebody says, well, we're creating an appeal process, we can do that, that's not before you. There is no appeal process here proposed. What we are considering simply is keeping them in the same category. Now, what they did, what they should have done, to be fair, if you wanted to change their title to more accurately reflect their duties and call them deputy courtroom clerk, then why do you then demote them to a different category and continue? And what you should have done is kept them in the number 6. Further, I would ask, and I'm not here to assail the study, I was here to defend the study. But let's be fair, why didn't you talk with the judges? None of the judges were consulted on the survey. That's in paragraph number 3 of this letter. Answer that. And look at the last paragraph of the letter. The survey agent did not consult with us directly about the positions or responsibilities. That's not the right way to do a study. If we're putting ourselves at odds here, the proposition was very simple. Keep them as they are. But if one is going to put yourself, and I thought the proposition, Mr. Riedel, in our meeting here was that you were supporting the amendment. Now I see you're in opposition to the amendment. So if that's the case, why then wasn't the job done properly and the judges consulted?
Thank you, Supervisor Rose. All right.
Chairman, my light's
Supervisor
on.
Ron Frederick, you have the floor.
Well, right now, we're talking about the referral back to the
That's
committee.
correct.
But as long as Terry strayed from that and talked about his resolution, I guess I can do that too. These 8 or 9 or 10 employees have 8 judges talking for them. We got, how many employees? 8, 7, 8, 5, I don't know. They got nobody talking for them. So is that right? The resolution, the amendment he's making is not right, okay? It's not right to, it's not federal employees. And if you want to talk about, they didn't talk to the judges. They didn't talk to any of the department head elected officials either, from what I understand. So none of them got talked to either. So let's just take that out of the equation, okay? They did a study. They got reports from the employees on what their job duties were, and they made a decision. And now we're going to have 8 or 9 people pulled aside and giving them another jump up because 8 judges think it's, well, maybe they're right. I don't know. But it's not right to the rest of our employees. So either we adopt this thing as it is and set up some kind of appeal process and get ready for the line, because there's going to be a long one probably. But we do not support this amendment. No place. No way. It's not right.
Okay. Grady's next. Supervisor Grady, you have the floor, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think everyone's had a pretty good kick at the can on this one. Everyone probably has in their minds if they'd like to have this referred back to committee or not. So without further ado, I'll move the question.
Second. Okay, the question's been moved and it's been seconded by... Supervisor O'Day, call the question. Okay.
Just sway the...
How's that? Thank you. Okay, there's been a motion to call the question and be a roll call on this particular item. Yes, if you're in favor of referring it all that... Okay, my fault, okay. All right, I wanted to move this along, but I guess I'm not moving along too well. And I apologize for that. A little humor here about now would be good. I got a little tense in here. Got a little tense. All right, so it's been moved to call the question, and it's been seconded, and we'll do a roll call if that's the pass, okay? Yes, if you're in favor, and no if you're against. be voting on is whether or not to refer back to committee, okay? So let her give a minute here to clear the machine. And if you're in favor of referring it back to committee, vote yes. If you do not want to refer it back to committee, vote no. Yes. We call a question on referring it back to committee. And now what we're voting on is if you want to refer it back. What would you like to know?
Would the Finance Committee meet very briefly following this meeting just to set up a meeting date next week?
Did everybody hear what he had to say? What the chairman of finance asked that after our meetings this evening, if you could meet up with him because he's going to set a special meeting for finance, okay?
And my proposal is that we would have it on the next agenda.
It's done. Just let them know what day and time.
Right, correct. We'll do that following
I'm not a
meeting.
mind reader on that there, Terry. Thank you.
All right, moving on.
Okay, we'll move on.
Resolution 121 from Human Service Committee, a resolution to approve the appointment of Julie Houseman to the Kenosha County Workforce Development Board. Holman, yes. Gable, yes. Anita Johnson, excused. Decker, yes. Arrington, excused. Blau, yes. Retzloff, yes.
Supervisor Gable.
I move Resolution 121.
Resolution 121's been moved by Supervisor Gable, seconded by Decker. Supervisor Gable.
This is an appointment of Julie Houseman to the Workforce Development Board. She's Assistant Superintendent of Teaching and Learning at Kenosha Unified. She would be replacing the Superintendent of Schools on that board.
Decker. Thank you. This is seeing no lights, simple majority vote. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed? Passes unanimously. County Clerk.
Resolution 122 from Human Service Committee, a resolution to approve the appointment of Richard Kessler to the Brookside Board of Trustees. Holman, yes. Gable, yes. Anita Johnson, excused. Decker, yes. Arrington, excused. Blau, yes. Retzloff, yes.
Supervisor Gable.
I move motion 122.
Resolution 122 has been moved by Supervisor Gable, seconded by Supervisor Blau. Supervisor Gable.
This is to appoint Richard Kessler to the Brookside Board of Trustees. Dick has been a county supervisor for years, chair of the board. He's well qualified for this.
Thank you. Seeing no lights, simple majority vote. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed. Thank you. County Clerk.
123 from Human Service Committee, a resolution to approve the appointment of Supervisor John O'Day to the Kenosha County Board of Health. Holman, yes. Gable, yes. Anita Johnson, excused. Decker, yes. Arrington, excused. Blau, yes. Retzloff, yes.
Supervisor Gable.
I move Resolution 123.
Resolution 123 has been moved by Supervisor Gable, seconded by Supervisor Ritzloff. Supervisor Gable.
This is a reappointment of Supervisor John O'Day to the Kenosha County Board of Health. What else can I say?
Thank you. Seeing no lights, oh, John, you want to talk? Oh, I'm sorry. All those in favor say aye. All those opposed. Thank you.
124 from Human Services Committee, a resolution to approve the appointment of Richard Willoughby to the Kenosha County Aging and Disability Resource Center Board. Holman, yes. Gable, yes. Anita Johnson, excused. Decker, yes. Arrington, excused. Blau, yes. Retzloff, yes.
Supervisor Gable.
I move Resolution 124.
Resolution 124 has been moved by Supervisor Gable, seconded by Ms. Decker. Supervisor Gable.
This is to appoint Richard Willoughby to the Kenosha County Aging and Disability Board. He has an outstanding resume. He'd be a great addition to that board.
Thank you. Seeing no lights, simple majority vote. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? County Clerk.
Claims 42, Brian Hanover, mailbox damage.
Refer to Corporation Council.
Approval of the April 8th, 2015 minutes by Supervisor Kohlmeyer.
Supervisor Kohlmeyer.
Motion to approve the minutes, the April 8th minutes as submitted.
Second.
The approval of the April 8th minutes have been moved by Supervisor Kohlmeyer, seconded by Supervisor Decker. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Can I get a motion to adjourn sin die? It's been a motion to adjourn sin die by Supervisor Dodge, seconded by Supervisor Esposito. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Now we're going to move on. We got one more meeting here, real short, folks. Won't take long. Yeah, it's on there. It's organizational one.
Do roll.
We're going to give a few minutes for the clerk's office to clear the board, and we will do another roll call in a second here. Works?
Confirming.
Okay, I'll call the meeting to order. We'll do a roll call, please, ladies and gentlemen. We'll go on to communications, County Clerk.
Communications, one from Andy M. Bueller regarding future items scheduled before the Planning, Development, Extension, Education Committee.
We'll receive and file. Is there a motion out there to adjourn? It's been moved by Supervisor Decker to adjourn, seconded by Supervisor Arrington. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed? Thank you. Have a great evening, folks.